Are you religious? Because if you are today, I want to talk to you because we're going to learn from the Apostle Paul that Jesus and religion actually don't go together. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Women's Bible Study. We are very glad you're joining us today. We are in the middle of a series on the book of Galatians, and our goal is to help you understand that Jesus is true freedom and that Jesus is also the true gospel. So we want to make sure that people understand that. Today's lesson, what I want to do is I want to set this up by telling you actually about one of our sons. Before our son went into college, he actually thought he wanted to go into some kind of ministry because he was just kind of like that. He loved God. He wanted, he was always a really, really good kid. So growing up, he was just like most normal kids. We grew up with him in our household, taking him to the doctor. He loved to play sports, so if he hurt himself, we'd have to, get whatever broke fixed. We spent years and years going to his games. We poured our life into him. We made sure he went to a good, high school so he could get into a good college. And we just did what most parents do with their children. And along with that, you try to raise them up to know Jesus and to live for him. And so when it was time for him to go away to college, we were not even the least bit concerned. Because he was just one of those kids. He gave his life to Jesus. He knew what that meant. He was involved in church. He never got in trouble. And knowing this, we knew that the minute he went away to college, he would be like a light to a very dark world. Until he wasn't. Until he joined a fraternity. Until he brought a girlfriend home that we're like, oh, that's not working for us. Like she wasn't even a believer. Until he stopped calling home. Until we found out he was doing things that he was taught all of his life not to do. And there was this feeling as a parent like, what in the world just happened? Like, you know better than that. And the problem is that he was states and states away from us. And phone calls were very, very scarce. And we were just sick about the whole thing. And some of you have children just like that, or even grandchildren like that. And you know the pain and the heartache of that. You know what they're doing is only hurting themselves. You know they're not living any sort of biblical life with any biblical wisdom at all. And you and I know, if you've lived any time on this earth, that there's serious consequences for doing things against God when you know that there's blessings when you do the right thing. But here's what we knew. We just wanted him to grow up in his love for Jesus. We wanted him to make good and godly decisions. We wanted Jesus to be formed in him. But we never saw that happening in those years. That's exactly where we find the Apostle Paul today. He started these churches in Galatia. He gave them this really, really good start. He taught them the good news, the gospel, the good news of Jesus, the gospel. He taught them all the good things. He taught them salvation was through Jesus alone. He taught them it wasn't about a religion. It wasn't about being a Jew. He taught them it was grace through faith in Jesus alone. And then some guys that we've been learning week after week called the Judaizers. They came in and started infiltrating these churches with a false message. Just like when our son went away to college and he started hanging out with fraternity brothers and he started getting a false message about what's going to make him happy. The parties are going to make you happy and the things that you were taught all your life not to do that now we want you to do. Those are the things a false message was being taught. But Paul, like us and our son, we were too far from our son away and Paul was too far away from Galatia to even get there in time to make the situation better. Back then, of course, we know there was no phones and no computers and no Twitter and no way to get the Galatia churches even a message that what they were hearing from the Judaizers was false. And so what we see is Paul's message, like to them in this letter, is pretty much how we feel about our wayward kids. And it was this, Galatians 4:19. My children, he called them my children, like, you are so special to me, you're like my children. He said, I am again suffering labor pains for you until Christ is formed in you. I would like to be with you right now and change my tone of voice because I don't know what to do about you. And so many of us as parents, we're like, we've felt that way with our kids. Like, I don't know what to do with you. Nothing you're doing is anything that we've ever taught you to do right. See, we have a heart. We want our children to grow up spiritually. We want them to read their Bibles. We want them to desire the things of God. We want Christ to be formed in them. But through this whole situation with our son, and even through what we're reading in Galatians, we learned this. That takes time. It takes time. And everyone is different. For us, after our son finally left college and the fraternity and he started working back in Phoenix again, still very far from God, Rob walked into his office one day and he challenged him, you need to get your life back to God again. He said, why don't you read the New Testament in 1 year? Like, just read it in a year. Let's just see what God does in your life. Our son took the challenge, but instead of a year, it took him a month. And as he made it through the New Testament, it was like everything clicked back into his life again. The Holy Spirit grabbed his heart. And we can honestly say 20 years later that Christ has been formed in him. But that did not happen overnight. And so today I want to really just encourage you right off the bat that for some of you who are watching and your child is off the rails, keep praying for them. Keep loving them. Keep talking to them. Because that's what Paul did to the people of Galatia. He never gave up on them. So often we want to just give up on the situation. Like, fine, do whatever you want to do. But he never did that. And we see this all through the letter that he's been writing. He couldn't stop reminding them over and over and over the truth of the gospel. Now, how Paul did it for the Galatians, as you well have known, we're on umpteenth lesson here. All through the lessons, he keeps giving them biblical illustrations. And he keeps telling them over and over illustrations that they would totally understand. And today he's going to use another illustration from the Old Testament, and I'm hoping today it will pull all this together as far as religion versus Jesus. Now, Paul uses a story that most of you, if you know the Bible, you're going to know, the story of Abraham and Sarah. And Paul tells the story because, remember, he's teaching to a lot of Jews that have become followers of Jesus that are now wavering between, should I be a Jew? Should I follow Jesus? Should I do both? What should I do? And he starts off the story, for us, we need to know that it's all about Abraham. And Abraham was the beginning of this Jewish nation. Here's a little map up here. We'll see, you can kind of see where Abraham lived. If you look at Abraham's, left arm, you can see down there is a place called Ur. Ur is actually our modern day Iraq. That's where Abraham originally came from. And then God called him up. If you see his little trail up there, up and all the way over by the Mediterranean Sea, you see Canaan. That's Israel that you know and I know of today. Abraham had a wife by the name of Sarah. Let's read a little about them in Genesis 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and I will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who treat you with contempt, and all the people on the earth will be blessed through you. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he left Haran, and he took his wife Sarah. Speaking of wives, I don't know why this made me laugh. A hooded robber burst into a Texas bank, forced the tellers to load sacks full of cash. On his way out the door, a brave Texas customer grabbed the hood, pulled it off of one of the robber's face, revealing what he looked like. The robber shot the customer without a moment's hesitation. Then he looked around at the bank and he saw another teller seeing his face, knew she could recognize him, so he shot her too. And then everybody else, the robber looked around, everyone was facing down, looking down at the floor. And the robber yelled, "Well, did anyone else see my face?" After a few moments of silence, a cowboy tentatively raised his hand and said, "My wife got a pretty good look at you." Okay, that's probably not the kind of marriage that Abraham and Sarah had, but here you go. Abraham had a wife named Sarah, okay? God had promised to make this great nation from Abraham's descendants. But the problem is that descendants have to come from babies, and Abraham and Sarah had no babies. Abraham is 75 years old. Sarah is 65. She's barren. She's never been able to conceive a child. So when God tells Abraham that he's going to give him descendants, Abraham probably runs home and tells Sarah, and they're so excited, like, yay, a baby. Now, in their mind, they're probably like, well, we're going to be a little bit older than most parents, but yay for a baby. But for 10 years, Sarah doesn't get pregnant. By now, Abraham's 85. Sarah's 75 years old. So Sarah comes up with this totally not so bright plan. Genesis 16:1, Abram's wife Sarah had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Sarah said to Abraham, "Since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family." And Abram agreed to what Sarah said. So Abram's wife Sarah took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife for him. This happened after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan 10 years. In other words, God wasn't working fast enough for Abraham and Sarah, so they thought they would help him along. Verse 4, he slept with Hagar. She became pregnant. When she realized she was pregnant, she treated her mistress with contempt. Now, I don't know why this always makes me laugh, because it's like, oh, okay, you're going to let your elderly husband have sex with the hot Egyptian maid who works for you in hopes that she's going to have a baby, and she's going to just hand the baby over to you, and you're going to raise the baby. And I think like, okay, in a perfect world, maybe, but we all know that we don't live in a perfect world. What Sarah just did was a disaster waiting to happen. This made me laugh. There was a thief who decided that the easiest way to steal gas was to siphon it from someone else's gas tank, stick a rubber hose, suck on the other end till you get a mouthful of gas, then you spit out the gas, and then you flow it into your tank. It made perfect sense to most people, except a thief in Seattle. He decided to siphon gas from someone's motorhome. When the man who was inside the motorhome heard commotion, he walked out to find this thief curled up on the ground, vomiting violently. What happened, he wondered. The thief made a really, really dumb mistake. Intending to suck up gasoline from the gas tank, he somehow put the hose in the wrong hole and sucked up the sewage tank instead, okay? That makes for kind of a really bad day. But it was a really dumb idea to begin with. And see, sometimes we have dumb ideas and we do it and they turn out disastrous, and that's kind of what's happening for Sarah. Now, in defense of Sarah, back then it actually was acceptable to give, if you can't get pregnant over so many years, to give, your husband to someone else, to raise a family that way. But maybe in her mind she was thinking a couple different things. Maybe she thought, well, Abraham's old, probably a little forgetful. Maybe he didn't hear from God the whole story. Maybe she thought, well, it's been 10 years. Maybe God really didn't mean I was going to have a baby, but that, I could raise a baby through Hagar. Or maybe she just was impatient. She was like, I just want a baby. I don't care how I get it. I just want one now. But what she didn't expect was that Hagar would get pregnant. And instead of lovingly hand over the baby, Hagar would treat her with utter contempt and taunt her like no other. You can just imagine. I have your husband's baby. You don't. I have your husband's baby. Nah, 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 nah. Like, you can just imagine what was going on. So Hagar gets pregnant, and even though it's Sarah's idea, she blames her husband Abraham. Verse 5 then says, Then Sarah said to Abram, You're responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and ever since she saw that she was pregnant, she's treated me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. Rob sent me this and it made me laugh. I assume this is the note Sarah left on the refrigerator for Abraham. Angry wife's note to husband. Your dinner's in the recipe book on page 32, and the ingredients are at the store. So think this through. God promises Abraham descendants, but Sarah's his wife. So of course God was talking about Abraham and Sarah. There's no reason why God would ever, think, oh, I'm just going to bring in some other woman. He wouldn't do that. God says, I'm promising you and Sarah a baby. But because they were older, this baby could only happen because of God's miraculous grace. Because Sarah was beyond childbearing age. And she couldn't do enough with her body to produce a child on her own. It would have to be a gift given freely to her by God. Now, keep that in mind because this is where Paul is going in our letter today, in the verses that we're going to talk about today. He wants you to know that there's a difference between grace and freedom. And he's going to show this by Sarah. And his bondage to the law, he's going to show this by Hagar. And he's using these two women and two different things to show people what the difference is between this. Hagar now has a son. His name is Ishmael. He grows up at this particular time. He's about 13 years old. Sarah still has not been able to have a baby. For 13 years, she's had to watch her husband love a child that wasn't even hers. The worst part about that was knowing that she had this son, Hagar had a son by her husband Abraham, and it really was her idea. There's really consequences to dumb decisions. I want to read this as just a side note today for our lesson. Chuck Swindoll wrote this because it's just a reminder of how we think that we're making good decisions when in fact we need to stop and really think about things before we do them. Chuck Swindoll writes, I read this past week of a couple, let's call them Carl and Clara, whose 25-year marriage was a good one. Not the most idyllic, but good. They now had 3 grown children who loved them dearly. They were also blessed with sufficient financial security to allow them room to dream about a lakeside retirement home, so they began looking. A widower, we'll call Ben, was selling his place. They liked it a lot, returned home to talk and plan. Months passed, and one day, out of the blue, Clara told Carl she wanted a divorce. He went numb. After all these years, why? How could she deceive him? How could she have been nursing some scheme while they were looking at a retirement home? She said she hadn't been. Actually, this was a recent decision now that she had found another man. Who? Clara admitted it was Ben, the owner of the lake house, whom she inadvertently ran into several weeks after they had discussed the sale. They'd begun seeing each other. Since they were now in love, there was no turning back. Not even the kids who hated the idea could dissuade their mother. On the day she was to leave, Carl walked through the kitchen toward the garage. Realizing she would be gone when he returned, he hesitated. Well, hon, I guess this is the last time. And then he broke down into sobs. She felt uneasy, hurriedly got her things together, and drove north to join Ben. Less than 2 weeks after she moved in with Ben, her new lover, he was seized with a heart attack. He lingered a few hours and then died. Her whole entire life just blew up because of just a really dumb decision. There's always consequences to making dumb decisions. And the funny thing is that she probably went into this thinking, I just love this man and I'm going to be the only one that's going to, this is ever going to work out for. We think that. We think I'm going to do this and of course it's going to work out for me because I'm different from everyone else. I'm going to leave my husband for that new guy. I'm going to have that affair because he's nicer than my husband. I'm just going to take that extra drink, extra pill, no big deal. For Sarah, it was like, I'm going to get a baby by having my husband sleep with my Egyptian maid. Like, duh, I don't think that's going to work too well, which is just a great reminder. Think before you do. Think who your decision's going to hurt. Think if God is going to bless what you are about to do. Because remember, to follow Jesus, your life is not about you anymore. Your life is doing what God calls you to do and living for Him, not living for yourself. Now, the reason why we don't like that is because our culture says, no, you just need to be happy. You need to do whatever's going to make you happy. But the problem is that that's not even a biblical thought. We hear it all the time. Life is short. You shouldn't live in misery. I don't know. Do you think Jesus would have gone to the cross with that kind of mentality? Do you think Jesus would have gone to the cross thinking, well, I don't want my Christian life to be painful. I just want to be happy. Imagine if the disciples actually thought that. Like, do you think they thought being thrown off of a temple and stoned to death or hung upside down on a cross or killed by a sword was going to make them happy? But see, their life wasn't about them. Their life was all about Jesus and serving him. And the reason why I just want to throw that in as a side note today is because we see this from Sarah. When people make really bad decisions, we see it all the time. They blow up their families and they can't get it back. Their spouse is like, I'm sorry. I can't trust you ever again. I don't want you back. Their boss is like, you know what? I don't trust you any longer. I don't want you working at this company. God says, I can bless you if you just do what I say. Deuteronomy 11:26 says this, look, today I set before you a blessing and a curse. There will be a blessing if you obey the commands of the Lord your God I'm giving you today. And a curse if you do not obey the commands of the Lord your God and you turn aside from the path I command you today by following other gods you've not known. Now, that's just a theme that was for the Old Testament, the Israelites, but it's the same concept for us today. Imagine Sarah's life. Had she not had this really dumb idea to let her husband sleep with Hagar, her life would have been so much more peaceful, a whole lot less stressful. And for those of you who have ex-wives, stepchildren, like, you know how that feels. I like my stepmom better than you. My stepdad's nicer to me than you are. I want to go live with my other side. And see, Sarah had her own version of that for about 13 years. But here's the good news. The good news is that even though we do dumb things, God is really good at redeeming and restoring. God didn't say, whoop, Sarah, you just blew the whole thing. Jesus can't come now because you just ruined everything. He didn't do that. God is always in control, and he can override our dumb things that we do. I always liken this to a chessboard. Whenever we make a wrong move, God is so big that he can override that move with something else to win the game. So look what happens, Genesis 17:1. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him. Verse 15, God said to Abram, as for your wife Sarah, do not call her Sarah, call her Sarah, will be her name. I will bless her, indeed I will give you a son by her. I will bless her and she will produce nations, kings of peoples will come from her. She's like, what? Really old, okay? I'm sorry. I would be like, serious, God? Like, Abraham's 99. I'm like 90. We can barely get to the bathroom, let alone run after a toddler, okay? What are you thinking? But God had this really, really great point that Paul is trying to make to us. Years later, when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 91, she has a baby boy, Isaac. The child that God promised is born. And so this is the story that Paul is using to the churches in Galatia to show there's a difference between these two things. We're going to say Hagar is religion, Sarah is freedom in Jesus. There's a difference between the two. Hagar is depicted as a slave, of bondage to the law, because she herself was a slave. Look at Galatians 4:22. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave, the other by a free woman. Paul says Abraham has Ishmael, born from slavery, and Isaac, born into freedom. Look at verse 23. But the one by the slave was born according to the impulse of the flesh, Ishmael, while the one by the free woman, Isaac, was born as a result of a promise. See, isn't it amazing? He's saying there's two different ways to live your life. Religious, slavery, bondage to the law, or freedom, which through the lineage of Isaac would come Jesus. See, there's this idea that there's lots of religions in the world, and there are, but it really actually comes down to two. If you're going to believe in Jesus, you're going to believe in Sarah's way. It's freedom. Jesus does everything. Just like God provided a baby for Sarah, when you put your faith in Jesus, God provided a way for us. We can't do anything to earn it. Sarah couldn't do anything to make herself pregnant. She just had to trust God that it would all work together and it would happen. She couldn't do anything on her own. But over here we see this whole Hagar, and they were manipulated and they did things to try to work it out. And he's saying, no, you don't want to live life like Hagar. That's religion. Religion is like Hagar. I have to do. It's human flesh. What can I do for God? What do I have to do to be a good person to make God happy with me? You see this in, like, let's say Mormonism. Like, I have to work. I have to do good things. I have to give a certain amount of money to the church. I have to work for the church. I have to do if I want to make it to the top level of heaven. If I want to be a god of another, planet. Like, this is a do. It's religion at its finest. If you're Catholic and you're putting your whole life into, I have to do the sacraments. I have to do penance. I have to confess to the priest. It's a do mentality. It's religion. It's all depicted by Hagar. But Sarah is not like that. It's like freedom. God does everything. He provided the baby. He provides a way for us to come to him because of what Jesus did, not what we do on our own. And Paul is trying to make this clear to these people. See, Abraham and Sarah didn't trust God for their promised son. They trusted in themselves. They trusted in something fleshly. Doesn't work that way. The cool part about it is that God gave Sarah a baby, and it was miraculous. And with this, Paul is trying to get through to the Galatian people. Stop going back to your religion. You've got to start putting your faith in what Jesus did miraculously on the cross. Paul goes on in verse 24 to explain this whole new covenant and old covenant. Verse 24, these things are illustrations, for the women represent the two covenants. One from Mount Sinai and bears children into slavery. This is Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. Paul is trying to say Hagar represents the law. Moses, gets the Israelites out of Egypt, leads them into the land of Israel. It takes 40 years, but you know what? They're trying to say that there's no freedom in that. We gave you the law. You have to live by the law. It was really like a total works-based thing. What Paul is trying to say is, look, we have moved away from that. We're no longer under the law. You have to eat this, do this, worship on this day, do all these things. No, that's not how this works any longer. He says we've moved over here to Sarah, to the new covenant, the promise of the Holy Spirit coming into our lives to change us. That's what this is all about, these two covenants. Daniel McGraw shares a story of how he gave up his old covenant religion. We'll read his story. He says, here's an interesting idea. Why don't you just give up on religion? Religion has caused wars. Religion drives people to do crazy things. Religion is just a way of controlling people. These are all things I've often heard when I'm talking with people. Before I get too far, I need to point out that I'm not against religion. On the contrary, I'm all for it in the right context. My story is simply about me giving up on my ideas on what my religion actually is. Growing up in West Texas, you never asked anyone if they believe in God. No, you simply asked people, what church do you go to? So growing up, I was set with this notion that everyone around me was religious and that church was where you had to go every Sunday and that the Bible was a book on how to live your life. So I got good at that because, hey, that's what you're supposed to do, right? It was in this setting that I learned about Jesus and how he died on the cross to save us from our sins. Well, I knew that I'd sinned before, so I decided that I needed to accept Christ, try to live a better life in order to earn love from God. So I became a self-proclaimed super Christian. I would go to church every Sunday and do everything that our youth group offered. Church camps, mission trips, you name it, you could find me there. They say that in university you can find out what you really believe. So I went to my university, got involved in a church very quickly. I had to keep up my life of being a super Christian because I needed to do these things to be right with God. See where he's going with that? Religion is a way you have to do things to be right with God. That's Hagar, okay? There, however, was something missing throughout this. Love. Not that God didn't love me, but honestly, I didn't love God. It was this checklist that I had to do. To fix this, I had to get involved in more and more stuff. It's that constant, I have to do more things to make God happy. So he said, I joined a student group that talked about sharing their faith a lot. They challenged me to take a class on that, and I agreed because, hey, that's something we're told to do. I didn't want to, but checked another box, so I went. From here, the teacher asked if I would go on a summer trip, that the focus was to grow in that. Again, I couldn't help, but to go, although I didn't want to at the time. So you might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with giving up religion? Well, one hot summer day in Branson, Missouri, I was sharing my faith with someone outside the shopping mall. I'd already talked about how God had created you and had a wonderful plan for your life. But what keeps us from experiencing this is our own imperfections that have separated us from God. I had shared that Jesus Christ came to earth to live the perfect life and die for our imperfection, and was in the middle of sharing how all you have to do is accept it when I realized this is what I believe. I had always agreed with this, but until this point, it had not clicked what it actually meant. I had lived my whole life focused on what I thought was the religion of Christianity. I had always thought you had to earn your salvation or relationship with God through faith and works. It finally clicked. It's not a checklist, but a relationship with God that Christianity is all about. That is what I had missed out on. My religion was getting in the way of me experiencing that. So at this point, I decided to drop my religion and start my relationship with God. I started to read my Bible, not because I was told to, but because I wanted to know what the God who created me had died for me says. I gave up on my shame that followed me every time I made a mistake because I'm not trying to earn this anymore. It was giving to me the freedom, the free gift from Christ. A surprising thing happened then. I became a better person. This came from wanting to be more like Christ, not because it was a rule to follow. I am far from perfect. I still do bad things, but these do not define me. Jesus paid the ultimate price and took the punishment. I deserved it. Now when God looks at me, he sees Christ's holiness and not my mistakes. My life is far from easy, but it's filled with so much more freedom that can only be found in Jesus. See the difference there? Like literally, religion is exhausting. And that's what Paul was trying to get through to the Galatians. The next verse Paul talks about in Galatians, he takes from Isaiah 54:1. Verse 27 says, "For it was written, 'Rejoice, childless woman who does not give birth. Burst into song and shout, you who are not in labor, for the children of the desolate are many, more numerous than those of the woman who has a husband.'" It probably means that even though Sarah does not have a whole lot of children, her descendants will be beyond numerous. And we know that because her descendants are all the Jewish people throughout all the ages. Paul wants to remind them, hey, Galatians, you are children of the promise. Isaac, freedom. Look at what verse 28 says. Now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of promise. He's saying this, religion and Jesus don't work together. And we learn this from this story. Isaac, the son of promise, Ishmael, the son of slavery. So to get what the next verse in Galatia means, we just have to kind of go back and see what's going on in Genesis. Sarah has Isaac. He's about 3-ish. When a child is weaned away from his mother, they usually throw a big party. So they throw this big party. Look at Genesis 21, verse 8. The child, Isaac, grew and was weaned. Abraham held a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son mocking, the one Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abraham. Sarah sees Abraham's 13-ish teenage son, Ishmael, mocking her 3-year-old son. And she's had it. Done. All over. It's not about Ishmael anymore. It's about our son Isaac, the son of promise. Look at back to Galatians 4:29. But just as then the child born according to the flesh, Ishmael, persecuted the one according to the Spirit, Isaac, so also now. Paul's trying to get through to the Galatians. Salvation is through Jesus alone. But you know what? When you tell people like that, you're going to be persecuted for your faith. just like Isaac was persecuted by Ishmael, these churches in Galatia are going to be persecuted too by the religious Jews of the day, by the Judaizers. You guys, he's saying, look back at your ancestors and let's learn from their story, from Sarah and Abraham. But look what Sarah says to Abraham in verse 10. So she said to Abraham, drive out this slave with her son, for the son of the slave will not be a co-heir with my son Isaac. Paul says, look at what happened. All the way back in Genesis, the child born of flesh, Hagar's child, cannot coexist with the child born of the Spirit. And Paul says this in Galatians 4, verse 30. But what does the scripture say? Drive out the slave and her son. For the son of the slave will never be a co-heir with the son of the free woman. I love it. Paul takes the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures that they knew, to try to make his point with what the Judaizers were trying to do. In other words, religion and Jesus don't work together. So Abraham literally had to tell his teenage son with Hagar to leave the premises. Genesis 21:11. Now this was a very difficult thing for Abraham because of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be concerned about the boy and your slave. Whatever Sarah says to you, listen to her, because your offspring will be traced through Isaac. This is the nation of Israel, the Jews. Their lineage would be traced all the way back to this one child, Isaac. Miraculously born, not because they did anything, but because God opened her womb when she was 90 and her husband was 100. The point is, Sarah couldn't do anything, only God could. And that is what Paul was saying. That is what salvation's like. We cannot work our way to make God love us. God makes a way for us through Jesus alone. And that's miraculous. Genesis 21:13 says this, but I will also make a nation of your slave sons because he's your offspring. Early in the morning, Abraham got up, took bread and a water skin, put them on Hagar's shoulders, and sent her and the boy away. She left and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she left the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, and she said, I can't bear to watch the boy die. So she sat nearby, she wept loudly. God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what's wrong, Hagar? Don't be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy from the place where he is. Get up, help the boy up, and support him, for I will make him a great nation. Then God opened her eyes. She saw a well of water, so she went and filled the water skin and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew. He settled in the wilderness and became an archer. He settled in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. As we end today, I want to just say this. Thanks to this crazy mess right here, the offspring of these two children, like thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, they're still at war today. They're in the news all the time. Israel, the child of the promise, Isaac, and the Arab nations from Ishmael, the child of the flesh, are constantly at war today, all because Sarah decided to make this decision way back then to do something really stupid. Genesis 16:12 says this man will be like a wild donkey. He's saying this about Ishmael. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live at odds with all of his brothers. The 12 tribes of Ishmael grew and extended throughout the Middle East. This would be the Muslim people who traced their lineage back to Ishmael. And we can thank Sarah for that. So, a couple lessons I want to take away today. Let's learn the importance of making good decisions. Always think before you act. And then let's learn this. Religion puts us in bondage, as seen as by Hagar. Following Jesus is freedom, as seen by Sarah. If you are following a religion, today is the day when you need to make a change, just like Daniel McGraw did, when he realized, I'm just doing things to check off a box. I don't even have a relationship. I'm not free. Stop trying to do things that will make God happy with you. But instead, follow Jesus. And it's so simple. Jesus, come into my life. There's no special words, but it's giving your life to him. Saying, God, I want you now to run my life. And instead, follow Jesus and let the Holy Spirit change you from the inside. Because that is the only way that you're going to find true freedom. Father, thank you for this story today. I pray for those that are stuck in a religion, God, that you would get them out, that you would help them to understand what true freedom is in Jesus alone. I pray that today is the day that you will open their eyes and they will become free and never, ever be in bondage to any religion again in their life. Thank you for what Jesus did to make that possible. In your name we pray. Amen. Have a really good day.